Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Current, Real Talk on Real Topics. My name is Bo. I'm joined with Curtis, per usual. We have to talk about something really, really important today.
Really important? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I'm ready.
So we were hanging out with some friends, and they mentioned a show that I'd not seen before, but they told me I'd love it.
Okay.
So I gave it a watch, and I finished an entire season and a half, and it completely caught up in a matter of like 2 days.
2 days. How many episodes in a season we talking, though?
Honestly, I don't remember how many the first season has. It's probably 10, 12 maybe.
Okay, so
And
binge-worthy.
Part of season 2 caught up live. Now it drops every Friday. It's a show called Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. Tell me about it.
So, long story short, there's an American football coach who gets hired to coach an English football or soccer team. Has no idea what he's doing, obviously. He's hired because the owner of the team wants to get back at her ex-husband.
Gotcha.
But Jason Sudeikis is the Ted Lasso character. He
So good.
is just the most positive. Just his character is so just contagious. He totally transforms the culture around him just by his demeanor. And
It's like can't get me down
just
attitude.
being a nice guy. Yeah, just being a nice guy. It's an amazing show.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Could not recommend it enough. The only hard part is to watch it. You have to. It's like only on Apple.
Oh,
TV.
Apple TV exclusive.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not like you can just go on Netflix and
Right.
watch it. But
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. I highly recommend
Didn't
it.
you-
Those of you that are listening, I highly recommend Ted Lasso.
Did you say get like a billion Emmy nominations?
Yeah, it was like 20 Emmy nominations.
wild.
I mean, it's really, really, really good. Here's what I'd say. Like, a lot of the feedback they're getting is, yes, it's positive. Yes, like, it's kind of, it's amazing what it's done for my marriage, for my relationships. Like,
Oh,
it's
wow.
just like, it's like, really captivating people. But it's still can be like some harsh language. Just heads up.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
an adult show. So I wouldn't say wouldn't highly recommend watching it with your kids, but
Makes sense.
it's still fantastic. Like
Yeah.
the whole premise of the show is just like kindness wins.
Well, I was just going to say, it seems
like-
like a cool idea to like put before
Yeah.
and say like, yeah, hey man, what does it look like when we're, I don't know, still nice and kind even when people aren't to us? Sounds like a very Jesus thing.
That's probably why I love it so much.
Yeah, it resonates.
Is-
Something true and beautiful
There's
in
just
there.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
There's so much beauty in like just loving
Yeah.
demeanor all the time.
Mm.
Man, it's so good.
Not an easy thing to do either. Jason
Matt-
Sudeikis,
Yeah.
though.
He does a great job.
He's
Yeah.
he's phenomenal.
There's also some really funny characters. I feel like all the cast does just a fantastic job, and you start seeing change and they do a really good job of just showing each individual character and their change of how Ted Lasso's changing. their life.
Just good character development. Yeah. Ted Lasso. Okay.
One guy just starts changing the entire environment just
I'm
by
about
his kindness and love.
I feel like I'd love it too because I love like British TV too. I enjoy that kind of stuff, and so you get a little bit of that too potentially.
Yeah.
Get some of the British humor, some of the British culture.
Yeah, and it is a comedy. So
Yeah.
So I didn't say that before, but it's
Ah.
yeah, it is funny.
Hilarious.
Yeah, it is funny at times, but also very heartwarming and make you want to cry in times too. So
Yeah, that's what you need in a good
Really
TV
good.
show.
Yep, it's really, really good.
Ted Lasso. Okay, we can talk Ted forever, but we should probably jump to the topic at hand.
Okay, I guess.
You ready for this?
Yeah.
I know
No,
it might not be as exciting as Ted Lasso, but we do
No, it is
have.
exciting.
Yeah. In fact, yeah, this is the end of
Yes.
our series we've been doing. So we've been going through this is week number 5. Why
Why
church?
church?
Yeah, taking a look, asking the question, okay, yeah, why church? How does this thing work? What's it about? So covered a lot of stuff. We covered, what's the message of the church? All right, what's the mission? How did it start? How did it manifest? And so week 5, what's our topic today?
Today's multiplication.
I was never
Essentially-
great at math. I'll be honest.
Essentially, we'll be talking about church growth.
Okay. Yeah.
Essentially, how does this thing expand? How does it?
Yeah.
What does essentially church growth look like? Multiplication of the church.
How does it move forward? Yeah. Those are good questions. And I feel like if you're someone that's in the ministry world, you're around that, like that's a very practical question for you. Okay, this whole church thing, how does it grow or how does it move forward? What do we do? But even for people who aren't in ministry, I think maybe you hear this and your mind says, well, this is for the professional people who are trying to grow the church. But I think what we're going to find too is that this question of how does the church move forward is going to be a very important one just for the average people sitting in the seats as well.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it reaches kind of, I think you'll have you'll want to know
exactly
how this thing happens no matter where you're at in life.
You might have a role to play in it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it'd be good to maybe start to talk about really how the church began, obviously, and then maybe what it looked like, church growth looked like the first church, like when it first started, what did church growth look like? And then maybe we can talk later on in the episode about our thoughts on church growth today.
Yeah.
And kind of maybe land there. So
I think that's good.
Obviously the book of Acts is really in the Bible, the book of Acts is kind of the story of the first church and how it began, how it grew, kind of took off in a certain part of the world. And obviously now it's a global movement, but I love the book of Acts. It's really cool.
Yeah,
I mean,
so good.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. There's no better place to go than the book of Acts. It's really laying out, like you said, the story of just how this church thing got started. And I think it's always so helpful. People think the book's just a bunch of, the Bible is a bunch of just random books thrown together that God penned. But I think it's good to, set it in the context and say, hey, we have this physician named Luke who is recounting and chronicling for us Paul and his early missionary journeys and Peter and what was happening in the church. So we get to kind of have an inside look of first century early beginnings. And we see some interesting things. Back then there was no church growth conferences.
Exactly.
Nothing quite like that. That was new on the horizon later on.
I think there is a conference called the Multiplication Conference.
Is there really?
I think so.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
There's definitely plenty of church growth conferences out there too. But I think when we're looking at the book of Acts, obviously, I think the answer that Acts gives us in terms of at least initially, how does this thing get started is we got to start with one place, which is God, right? We look at the start of the church, which typically theologians look to Pentecost. This is where it begins. This is where Jesus is left, but now the giving of the Spirit he promised has finally arrived. It's empowered his people. This is the birth of the church. And so we can't start anywhere except for the Spirit descending on people. God shows up. God initiates. And so I think of in that same sermon, Peter gets done preaching this big gospel message. A bunch of people come to believe the church is multiplied. And then when Luke talks about how the church kind of functions early on, he lists all these things they're doing in Acts 2:44, like they're gathering together, they're breaking bread. But I love what it says at the end. And it says, and every day the Lord added to them those who were being saved. Yeah. So, to ask that question, how did it all get started? I think first we just have to say, hey, God moves, God acts. Yeah. That's where the growth starts.
Yeah, God grows his church. And I think it's hard, like especially if you're a church leader maybe listening, or you've been involved in ministry whatsoever, or maybe you've led a Bible study even, maybe you've kind of done lay ministry. There's always this tension of like my work, my effort to grow people or to grow the church or to grow my Bible study or to, like there's this really tug for the human effort side of it. Like, am I doing enough?
Yeah.
But it's a great reminder we see in the book of Acts that it's God who grows the church. And, obviously prayer plays a big role in that, but really just surrendering and submitting to God and his work and people is really the backbone of how it's always been. God has always grown his church. I mean, obviously he uses people as a method, but ultimately he is responsible for church growth, and obviously that's a great place to start.
Yeah, because I think you're right. So often we can kind of play the game of, okay, well, if I just do enough effort in just the right ways, I can make this thing go forward. And I think it's always a dangerous thing when we start off and we're running down the road and saying, hey, let me just take the church as far as I can take it. Yeah. And that is, it could be fairly far for some people, but at the end of the day, there's a limit. And if we're talking about doing something that's transcendent and eternal and massive, well, we need to tap into something a little bit bigger. Or I think of Romans 2, Paul says, no one can say that Jesus is Lord except by the Spirit. So, God has to be there. That's kind of foundational. But I love what you said is that God wants to use people. And I think that's the big second part of this is that when we look at the early church's picture, absolutely God's showing up, the Spirit's moving. But I think this also can't happen without the participation of other people that God's trying to use. God could do things all by himself, unilaterally, if he wanted. Like, he's got all the power, whatever. But what I love, the picture we see, is that our God is one who loves to partner with people, even at the detriment of the project.
Yeah.
He wants to invite people in, even if it means taking a few steps back. There's this sort of co-laboring. And so I think of, in 1 Corinthians, Paul's kind of talking about like, hey, people were getting baptized and people were fighting over like, well, did Apollos baptize you? No, Paul baptized me, And Paul's like, dude, who matters? Are you following Apollos? Are you following Paul? Like, who's the real aim here? No, Jesus is the thing. And so Paul points to that same idea. He says, we all had some division of labor. I spread some seed, the Apollos water, but God gives the growth. So there it is. God's given the growth, but Paul acknowledges like, hey, he utilized humans to do it. He scattered the seed through Paul. He's watering through Apollos. So really church growth is sort of this messy, divine, human, co-laboring collaboration.
Yeah.
And exactly how we parse it out is where it gets messy. But I think to start, we have to say, yes, we have to have these two parts. God's got to show up. We're kidding ourselves if we just start running down the road. But also, we can't just sit, cross our legs and be like, hey, no, God's doing it, so whatever.
Yeah.
He invites us to participate. So we need to hold those two in tension, I think.
Yeah. What's the kind of cheesy phrase? Pray like it depends on God, but work like it depends on you, or something.
Oh, like okay. I don't know that I've ever heard that.
I don't know.
I
It kind of gets like at the tension there.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know.
I think that's good. Yeah. Calling for prayer. Like, yeah, hey man, let's pray as if God depends on it. But yeah, let's get to work as if it's us.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. And so, we look at this, we go back to Acts, we see exactly what you're describing here. There's a move of God. Like there's moments in Acts where I think Peter gets up and he preaches and it says that, 5,000 plus people were added to the church.
Yeah.
There's a move of the Spirit of God. All these people kind of captured, like they get behind the resurrection and think, oh my goodness, like I want to be a part of this movement. So for sure, there's a move of God. That God is working. But Peter's also faithful to preach the gospel.
Yes.
And Paul is going these missionary journeys and sharing the gospel all over. So we do see this tension there. But let's get more specific and talk about church specifically multiplying. What that kind of process was as far as organically. We know Paul went and preached the gospel. People were, hearing the gospel, responding to the gospel and whatever. God was moving. But as far as church growth specifically, let's talk about that in the book of Acts, because it was very different than today. There wasn't massive church buildings.
Yes.
Obviously.
Yeah.
There wasn't light shows and loud electric guitars and whatever else.
Fog machines. It didn't have any of those in the first century.
Yeah. So let's talk about maybe what that looked like for them then. It was.
That's great. I think obviously there are moments in which there's these large scale gatherings. Peter's talking to several hundreds or whatever. But you're so right. When you think of church today, and then you stretch back your mind to the first century, very different pictures. And so what we find, in the first century is not, charismatic leaders in big buildings kind of drawing numbers to come see them or anything like that. Really what Christianity has been is sort of this small grassroots movement in which, sometimes through the preaching of an individual, but I think oftentimes just through life-on-life interactions amidst people, they're living in small communal house churches and having experiences with one another, having conversations with those people around them. And so if we talk about church growth strategies, it wasn't getting together and sending out flyers and putting on radio ads or any of those kind of things. It really was saying, hey, what does it look like for us to take seriously the story we're telling ourselves, to live it out, and I think oftentimes sort of become what Jesus says, a city situated on a hill, a light to the world. And people see this and say, okay, maybe there's another way. Maybe there is another king. Maybe there's something else going on. Yeah,
and it was cool because, you can read in the book of Acts, and there's some practical language too. It talks about how they shared everything in common. They very much were meeting tangible needs of each other in their community. They were opening their homes and fellowshipping and breaking bread and eating together. It was a very, like you mentioned, kind of a grassroots movement. It was very, very community driven. And again, just like all things we talk about almost every episode, like through time and through history, like church has changed. But how can we get back to the original way? Like, what are some things we can learn from that? And I think there's a lot to be learned. In the Book of Acts and kind of how the church first multiplied.
Absolutely. And just looking at that picture and saying, yeah, I mean, Luke describing this early bit of church, it's not, hey, they met up once a week and they sang some songs and stuff, although kind of gathering in that sort of formal setting for worship definitely was a part of it. But there was this element of, we're gathered together, we're sharing things in common, we're breaking bread, and there is a bit more, I think, I guess maybe communal intimacy is the word I want to use. But it was people living their lives around each other. And I think when we put all of the church growth task on some of our strategies and all these things we can do, which are good things and have bore a lot of fruit, I think that's fine. But I think sometimes it's more shocking when we look at the early church and say, hey, as this small, persecuted, not intensely organized all over, just individual autonomous pockets, yet in the midst of this sort of setting, it still grew. It blew up. Like, how do we account for just the growth of this church? Amidst a small, just persecuted minority that always had it really, really bad, and yet it just kept growing. And I think that's another way we look and say, man, God's at work here in the midst of just these small pockets of community. We look at the church now and we're like, oh man, we have it so great, everything's so good, but what's crazy is like it's never had a leg up or been the big dog, dog on campus, but it's still moving, it's still growing.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on that because I think, people look at even the state of the world today, like let's just get really practical and like current events here. People look at the world today and be like, oh my gosh, the church is failing, the church is like, it's declining. It's like, oh my gosh, like the world's coming to an end here. Like it's just this doom and gloom like attitude about like the church won't survive, like we're being attacked, we're being persecuted, and like, we're not really not. But in all honesty, like the church flourishes when it's this small, organic, very kind of grassroots. Like I think in some way, like I don't want bad things to happen to Christians in America or, I'm not saying that at all. But I will say I still have hope, even when things are looking bleak, that the church can advance, that God can still grow his church.
Yeah.
I have extreme hope because I've just seen through history that happen.
Yeah.
It's just that's how it's always been. Like great Christian movements have always started with extreme difficulty and challenges.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, again, God shows up and moves. And
and we have the chance to see God show up and move when it's in that sort of state, when it's fat and easy. Like there's no I think of it sometimes like the dangers of just being rich, like personally, is like, oh, this is like, I got it, this is fine, like actually I'm good, I'm doing it, look at me, I'm making the business moves, and so it's growing and everything's well. But it's in those moments where it's like, I don't have anything in my bank account, what am I gonna do? And it's kind of like now I need to turn and say, God, like give me my daily bread, like you meet the sparrow's needs, you need to meet mine. And there's sort of this just raw dependency there, a need, like we have no other options. And so I think that can be good. It calls people to say, hey, we need to rely and depend and look to God for how to grow this thing and provide us means to do so. I think we can still do that and have these big, beautiful blessings we have, like being able to gather in large groups and put on videos and not have to be worried about our government persecuting us. But if all of that causes us to stray away and say again, we lose the co-laboring and we say, I don't know, I just need to find fancy strategies to do this. Again, we're missing it. And sometimes, persecution or just a struggling setting calls us to say, okay, maybe I need God to be a part of this, which is a good reminder.
For sure. And so obviously see Book of Acts, multiplication, it's happening very organically. It's happening in small pockets. It's happening, like through relationships and just sharing things together and being a part of it. So, there are different methods now of church growth, multiplication. There's different ideas of what that should look like. The house church model, like we talked about, is kind of coming back. There's a lot of churches that are kind of swinging back towards that method. There's still the big mega churches that are just trying to pack their auditoriums every Sunday, and then there's a lot in between. What do you think? If I were just to put you on the spot, and I know even rhythm may be different than what you think is like maybe the most effective, or I don't know, maybe speak to like current day. What would you like to see how would you like to see the church multiply?
Yeah.
I guess is a better way to.
That's a really good question. And I think at times my opinion on this is kind of shifting and changing. I'm trying to solidify a bit of what exactly I think's best. But I would say right now, at the end of the day, I go back to those Acts stories and I say, yes, if I want to grow the church, I need God to show up and I need people to be in community and I need people to be seeking and pursuing this God. And so I think I look to a church like the Meeting House up in Canada, and I think they're doing a fantastic job where they're saying, hey, this sort of Sunday church is our large gathering experience where we're all kind of gathering together. But they encourage their people to say, hey, when you're thinking about church, they use the language in their services of house church. Like you're going to your house church this week and sitting in those pockets and having those sort of communal experiences. And also, you're reading scripture, you're doing those things that are part of your spiritual practices. But I think an emphasis, on these small, tangible life-on-life moments is going to do the best multiplication. And I also want to say it's going to do the most long-lasting multiplication. So let me explain what I mean by that is people come in and see a Sunday service, and I think absolutely that can change and transform. They can have an encounter with Jesus, but I don't know how much steam that gets you if at the end of the day, that's pretty much what you're doing. You're showing up for the hour, you're leaving, you're having nominal contact with other people, and maybe you sang a few songs and you're gone. That can work, but I don't think it has enough steam where I think, okay, we put people in pockets where they have relational connections there. They have people that are keeping them there. They're having more raw life experiences. They have an ability to participate more in what's happening in that community too, feeling a bigger part of it. I just think what we find in that setting provides a bit more longevity too. That they're experiencing more than just a 1 hour on a Sunday.
Yeah. I feel like that's the kind of the tension, at least here in the Midwest, Mason City, Iowa, is this assumption that I think most people feel like coming to church on Sunday, it's enough for me. Like I'm getting what I need on Sunday, which is cool. But I wonder about, again, our job as Christians is to share this good news. It's to invite people into this life that you know. And if it's something that has totally transformed your life and you feel like it gives you hope and joy and satisfaction and peace and whatever everything offers you, how could you not want to share that with other people that may be longing for the same thing? And so I totally agree with you. I think it happens in organic, natural relationships. I think it happens in community. I think it happens in ways that you're seeking out and interacting with people on a daily basis. That's very normal and natural. And I think it's getting past this attitude of I've done all I need to do by coming to church.
Yeah.
And that just ends there. Well, there's going to be no multiplication if that's your attitude.
Yeah.
If it's very consumer minded.
Yes.
I've done, I'm good now. I can just go about my business. But if it's something that's totally changed your life and transformed it, how could you not want to share that with somebody else? And that's how our posture needs to be. And I think even getting people in our church and, to understand this is, it's much bigger than just you. It's much bigger than you just consuming information. How can we share this message with people that so desperately I think are looking or needing, some answers in life.
Man, that's so good. And I think you hit it on the head here a little bit. When I think about people coming to church, and again, I think part of it starts with this question we're asking this whole series, which is why church? Why are we doing this? And I think you're right. People think, hey, if I'm a Christian, it means I need to do a few things to connect with God. It means I need to pray sometimes. It means I need to read my Bible sometimes. And I need to show up to church on Sunday. If I check those 3 things off, I'm in pretty good standing. But it's because we look at the why church. It's hey, why are we doing this? Well, I'm here to maybe get a little spiritual information, or I'm here to have my batteries recharged a little bit spiritually, And I think those things can and should happen in a Sunday service to some extent. Praise God, you leave, you feel a bit motivated, you feel like you've had some growth, some learning, and that's a good thing. But when we reduce church to that, when that's the why, then we don't, I don't think we're going to see that multiplication. But again, we talked about this in, the past series, I think we have a bit of amnesia. We've forgotten who we are. What's our story? Why are we doing this whole thing? And to the extent that we can remember as a church, no, hey, we've been grafted into Israel's story, and we're not sitting around just trying to learn some God facts or feel a little better spiritually or have a warm fuzzy. If those happen, that's awesome. But no, we're gathering because we think, hey, this story is true, that God has made promises and covenant to his people. The God who's delivered his people from Egyptian slavery and liberated his people has come to liberate them again in the person of Jesus. And that now we as, the new Israel combined of both Gentile and Jewish believers get to fulfill Israel's original story, which is to be that city situated on the hill, the light to the nations, people empowered by the Spirit of God to participate and grow this kingdom. And when you're like, okay, I'm stepping into this story, it makes more sense to say that, oh, of course I'm not just sitting in the Sunday seat once an hour. Like, no, I'm living out this bigger, fuller orb story. And so, yeah, I think we need to just go back and keep asking ourselves, why church? Because if it is just to learn some facts, sure, I get it. But if it's more than that, yeah, I think it makes sense that we need more than just those Sundays.
Absolutely. I don't know if I can add anything else to that. I think it's a great landing point. I think you should back up 30 seconds and listen to that again. That's the heart of this series. I really do.
Yeah.
It's articulated so well. I mean, why church? Why do we do this? And we'd love to hear your input, your feedback on any of this. If you have questions about church or specifically our church here at Rhythm, or you have input, feedback on the global church, what its efforts are, multiplication, mission, whatever it may be sure and let us know. Feel free to reach out to us. You can go to rhythmchurch.org. You can find our emails there. We'd be happy to interact with you and engage on some level. But, man, good stuff.
Yeah.
Appreciate you. All right. That's another episode of The Current. Real talk on real topics. We'll see you back here next time. Hope you have a blessed week. Grace and peace.